Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. This is another episode of our GP educational series where we offer free tips, tricks, and training around Dynamics GP to help you utilize your solution better and get more results from your Dynamics GP solution. So today we're going to be looking at 1099 form changes for 2020 and how that relates to your Dynamics GP solution. Bill Schultz is our senior Dynamics consultant here, and he's going to be presenting the content today. My name is Brad Vorbeck. I work here in marketing at Turnkey Technologies. And of course, if you have any questions today, please feel free to ask those via the GoToWebinar panel, either in the chat section or the question section, and we'll go ahead and field those up and get those answered at the end in a Q&A session. And also the webinar is going to be recorded, so we will send that out tomorrow in a follow-up email for you to review and share, along with the PowerPoints as well, so you'll have that information in case there's anything that you miss. And so just a little bit about Turnkey Technologies before we dive in. We've been around since 1994, and since then our entire focus has been around helping businesses implement and maximize the results of their Microsoft solutions. So that started out as Dynamics GP back before it was acquired by Microsoft when it was called Great Plains. And since then, we've become a full Microsoft Dynamics ERP provider, which includes Dynamics 365, which are the newer solutions from Microsoft, as well as their Dynamics 365 CRM solutions and Power BI and the services that go along with those. So we like to provide webinars like these, free educational opportunities to just help the Dynamics community learn a little bit more about their solution and just learn some tips and tricks that might make their life a little bit easier. So we're excited to present this for you today and hope you get some valuable information out of it. Again, please feel free to ask questions. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email tomorrow. And that's it for my bit. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Bill Schultz, who's going to take us into the 1099 form changes. Bill?
Thanks a lot, Brad. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're going to talk about 1099 form changes. I'm Bill Schultz. I've been a consultant with Turnkey for about 6 years. I was a GP user for about 6 years before that, so I've been in the product for about 12 years now, starting with GP 8, I think is what we had when I first started. So I've seen a lot of changes through GP through the years. Let's look today at 1099 form changes, what's up for 2020. We're going to talk about a little bit of background about 1099 reporting. We'll talk about what's changing, when to expect it, what do we need to be doing today, and what tools does GP offer. We'll talk quite a bit about what's changing and the tools, obviously, to talk about how to prepare for this update. So a little background on 1099 form changes. First of all, the purpose of the 1099 miscellaneous is it's an annual information return that you'll use to report miscellaneous payments made to vendors or contractors for a non-employee compensation. That's kind of what you typically think of with the 1099 miscellaneous is the non-employee compensation. Now there's other things on there, rents and royalties and rents and royalties and attorney payments and medical payments and things like that. But by far the majority of our clients are using this reporting for the Box 7 non-employee compensation, and that's the one that's changing this year. And of course, I need to do a disclaimer. We're not offering, I should say this, we're not offering tax advice, and you should consult your accountants for specific guidance on what to report and when. This session is just to discuss what changes are occurring and how GP tracks this information makes it easy for you to complete your filing requirement. It's like a medical disclaimer, right? But seriously, if you've got questions about what payments you should be tracking and who you should report and who you shouldn't report, you should probably talk to your tax accountants to be sure you're getting the right guidance. We're not really offering you tax advice, but we are going to show you how GP can help you report that information quickly and easily and make your compliance a better situation. So then let's talk about what is required. Generally, you want to include all vendors that are not incorporated. So if you're paying Walmart or Staples for stuff, well, then you don't need to report them. They're getting the IRS is getting all the information they need on those incorporated companies. This is really for your moms and pops, your individuals, your partnerships, LLCs, LLPs. There are some corporate entities involved, like your attorneys and medical payments and stuff like that, rental payments. Those you might be paying to an Inc. and you'd still report them. But the Box 7 is generally for your mom and pop shops. The guy that's doing the pest control, that's on a operating as a DBA, that kind of thing. And so that's what we're really talking about here is what's and of course it's limited to $600. It has to be payments of more than $600 in a calendar year. Okay, so these are the things that you would usually use to report on your 1099. So what do you not include? Well, don't include amounts paid to vendors via credit card or debit cards. Why? Because those credit card companies are already reporting that stuff. There's a 1099-K, I think it is, that the vendors will receive from the credit card company. So the IRS is already getting information on what's being paid. So if you have a bug guy that comes out and does your spraying, and he's an individual, and you would normally report him, but you're paying him by credit card, you do not have to track 1099 reporting on that guy. Okay, be aware of penalties. They can be stiff. You can see $50 to $270 for each return, and that doesn't mean all my returns are late today. That means the return for this company and the return for that company and the return for that company. So each of those individually can be $50 to $270 for each return not timely filed, and the penalties aren't capped until well over $1 million. So penalties can run up pretty fast. My general guidance there is report more, be more inclusive, not less. There's no penalties for over-reporting. There are penalties for under-reporting. And then plan ahead. Ask your vendors to get your W-9 to you before you make any payments to them. You don't have any leverage over them once you've made a payment. And if you don't get a W-9 and you don't have the right tax ID and you prepare your return and the IRS tells you, well, you've got the wrong tax ID. Well, if you don't get the corrected one and you can't fix it, then you're going to end up in a backup withholding situation. Now, GP can help you with backup withholding, but nobody wants to be in that situation. Okay, there's a website, irs.gov. You can go to get that W-9 form, and it's on the screen there. All right, so then what's changing? Well, the big news for 2020 is that there's a new 1099 NEC form next year. So the most of the things that you're currently reporting on the 1099 miscellaneous in box 7 are going to be moved to the new form. For most of our clients, that's most, if not all, of the reporting that they're doing. So you're going to have to start reporting on a new 1099 NEC form. We'll look at that form in just a minute. But GP will help you, and we'll talk about how GP is going to help you with that. The other big change I noticed was I was kind of going through some of the details is there's no more automatic extensions. In the past, and I don't know if this is true this year or not, they maybe have eliminated it this year, or maybe it was still in place this year, but in the past, if you got to January 28th and said, you know what, I'm not going to make it the 31st, I just can't get it done, you could file, I think it's a form 8809 for an automatic extension. You send the 8809 into the IRS and you automatically got an extra 30 days. So that was an easy button, right? Bam, I'm going to be late, hit the easy button, no penalties, I get an automatic 30-day extension. Those have been eliminated. There are still extensions available. I think there's 5 different areas where you can get an extension, but they're like somebody died or the building burned down, or, I mean, they're pretty extensive. So pretty extreme. So you should not expect to get an extension of time on your filing requirements. So you really need to plan to be on time with that. So we're getting a new form. Also, some boxes are going to change. Obviously, box 7 is going to move to a new form. So the other boxes are going to flip around a little bit. Attorneys are going to move from box 14 to box 10, and direct sales over 5,000 move from box 9 to box 7. Crop sales will move. Let's look at those. Here's a list of the different line items. So you can see 1 through 6, rents, royalties, other income, federal income tax withheld, fishing boat, and medical proceeds, medical payments are all the same year from between 19 and 20. But in box 7, non-employee compensation, of course, is moving to the new form. Direct sales of 5,000 is moving from box 9 to box 7. Crop insurance proceeds from box 10 to box 9. And gross proceeds paid to attorneys from 14 to 10. Okay, and there's a new non-qualified deferred compensation that's going into box 14 next year. So those are just the line changes you need to be aware of, and we'll look at it later, but you'll see where we track those different line numbers at the vendor level to make sure they get into the right box on the form. So then here's what the form is going to look like next year. Looks a lot like the 1099 miscellaneous, not drastically different. Box 1, non-employee compensation, is what used to be box 7 on the 1099 miscellaneous. Box 4 on this form is still your federal income tax withheld. If you've got any state income tax withheld, your payer's name and the state income down at the bottom, boxes 5, 6, and 7. I rarely have seen those used. So you can see the format of the form is pretty straightforward. Here is a 2019. This is the form you just completed this year. And so you'll notice that the non-employee compensation there in box 7, right? That's what we're using right now. Again, those attorney payments are down in box 14. Direct sales are in box 9. But then when you get to the 2020 form, you can see that box 7 is turned over to direct sales. Gross proceeds to attorneys is box 9. Crop insurance is box 10 is the attorneys. Box 9 is the crop insurance. So you can see this is what the new form is going to look like. Again, the form doesn't change that much, just the line numbers have changed. And so your tracking in GP is going to have to reflect those new forms, those new lines. All right, so when does this all take place? Well, it's happening right now. It's effective for any payments made in 2020. So payments made from the first of the year are already impacted by this new reporting requirement. What about GP? GP doesn't look any different today. Well, you probably won't see any change in GP until the year-end update is completed in November, December timeframe. For those of you who who apply the year-end update every year, then you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't have payroll, then you might not even be aware that there is a year-end update. Every year there is a year-end update. And I don't know, 2 or 3, I didn't ever look it up, but 2 or 3 years ago we had another change in the 1099 form. And so all of our clients that were doing 1099 filing that were not using payroll still needed to do the year-end update in order to get those new form changes. And that's what we expect will happen this year as well, that the Microsoft will issue a year-end update in the November, December timeframe. And those changes to the forms, that new form will be reflected in the program. Okay. If you're on, the big news here is if you're on GP 2015, mainstream support ended for will end for GP 2015 on April 1st. So that means GP 2015 won't get a year-end update. If you're on GP 2015 and you use GP to do your 1099 reporting this year, you won't be able to use it next year because it won't be compliant. Your version of GP won't have the update to represent that new form. So you need to be thinking about doing an upgrade and we can get you on to 2018 yet this year, and you'll be that way you can be compliant at the end of the year. So that's an important planning step for you if you're on 2015 or earlier. If you're on earlier than 2015, then you're probably not using GP to do your 1099 actual forms. Now you can still do your tracking in GP. You can still prepare your data and produce a data file easily, no problem. But just you won't be able to use the GP forms if you're on GP 2015 or earlier. All right, hopefully that's clear enough. So what do I mean you to be doing today? Really nothing. Okay, it's one of those few times where you consider yourself head of the game. You can say to your boss, I'm on top of that, Rose. There's nothing that you need to do today. At year end, we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to make sure that those amounts are all being reported in the right place. But we can do all of that at the end of the year. We don't have to do anything with that today. Okay, so that's the kind of the easy button there, is there's nothing to be done today. So then what tools is GP going to offer to us to make these updates at the end of the year? We're going to go through all these screens individually. We'll go through them pretty quickly. There's a couple of key ones I want to focus on. But to do 1099 reporting requires a variety of tools. You've got the vendor card where the basic information is stored for each vendor. You've got a 1099 details card where you can look at what the report is going to look like for that year. We'll go through each of these individually, so don't get hung up on that just yet. There's an edit 1099 transaction information screen. You can use transaction entry and receiving transaction to track your 1099 details on an individual transaction. There are inquiry screens, there's a utility, there's a routine, and there's the company withholding setup. So all of these different tools, these different windows make it possible for you to better track 1099s reporting data. So let's look at those individual screens. Here's the vendor maintenance option. So I'm under purchasing, cards, vendor, and then options, the little options button in the bottom right-hand corner of the vendor card. So vendor maintenance options, you can see that we've got a tax type and a 1099 box. This is where you track for each vendor what their 1099 tax type is. You can see that currently we have 4 types: not a 1099 vendor, dividend, interest, and miscellaneous. There are 3 different forms right now: a dividend form, an interest form, and a miscellaneous form. I expect what Microsoft will do is they'll add a 4th form on there for NEC. And this is where you'll change your tax type to the NEC form. And then in the box 1099 box line, that's where you decide which box number you're going to put the do the reporting in. And so what I expect we're going to have to do is we're going to change people from miscellaneous box 7 to NEC box 1, right? That's the change we need to make at the end of the year. But this is where you're going to make the change. You make it in vendor maintenance options, although there are some tools to help us do that much quicker without having to touch each vendor individually. But when you set up a new vendor, this is where you would go to make those changes once that new NEC form is represented on the vendor card. And then on another vendor card that's available to you is the 1099 details card. There's also a similar inquiry screen. I'll put them both on there for you to look at. The inquiry screen is just a view only. You don't just look at what's going to happen. But the 1099 details screen is where you can actually make changes. And this used to be, when you go back to the old days, back when I first was involved with GP, was using it as a user, this was the only way you could change your 1099 reporting, was you'd come into this 1099 details card and you'd actually change the amounts on the line. So if that non-employee compensation that shows $10,474 for April of 2027 was supposed to be $5,474, I could go into this cell and actually make that change. Let's jump into GP for a minute and take a look at that. So if I come into, I'm in purchasing, I'm in cards, and here's 1099 details. I'll click on that. And I'm going to pull up Beaumont Construction. That's going to be my special company for the day. And so you can see, I'm looking now at, it's looking at the current month, April of 2027. This is my demo system, is April 2027. You can see that it's got 10,474. I can click in that field and I can make that be whatever I need it to be. So if I need that to be $5,000, I can make that change directly in that cell. Likewise, I can go through, and I'm going to discard that for a minute. I can go through month by month and change whatever month I need to change. Okay. If I want to see what the total year reporting is, it's 20,900. Now I can't change the year. I can only change it at the month level. But I can make those changes directly in here. And if I've got something that I've reported as a 7 that should have been a rent, box 1, I can make the change here. The good part about this is it's easy, right? It's quick. I can make the changes, reflect on my 1099 form when I print it. The bad news is if I need to do a reconcile in purchasing, if I ever have to do a reconcile, I lose these changes. Well, why is that? A reconcile takes summary totals like this window here and compares it back to the detailed transactions that are stored in the tables. And so it'll go back and say, well, what payments did I make to this vendor this year? And did I track 1099 reporting for those payments? And if I didn't track it, then it's not going to show up in the summary data here. So when I make changes in the summary data, the reconcile undoes that change. So that's kind of the bad side of using the 1099 details. All right, let's go on and take a look at the next screen. So then on the payables transaction entry, this just shows you where you track the information, right? And you probably know this. You're in purchasing, transactions, transaction entry. This is your payables management system. If you've got a vendor that you're tracking 1099 payments for, then you put it in that field there. If you've got a $10,000 payment to the vendor, but only $5,000 of that is reportable, then you simply change the 1099 amount to $5,000. If you need to change the reporting for a particular transaction, you can. That doesn't happen very often. You don't usually need to go, that's the clicking on the blue expansion arrow opens this box. You don't usually need to go in and at the transaction level make a change. If you're having to make a change here, that means your vendor's probably set up incorrectly and you need to go change that. So these default in from the vendor card. But this is where you make those, you do that tracking on the payables management screen. And then over in purchase order processing, you've got the same window. So again, you've got the 1099 amount. By the way, these fields are grayed out when you don't have when your vendor is not a 1099 vendor. This is a 1099 vendor, so this amount is available to me. If this was not a 1099 vendor, then that would be grayed out. I couldn't make any entry in there. So you can use it in purchase order processing as well as payables management. Okay, let's go on and look at, this is probably one of the most important windows that you're going to have. This is the edit 1099 transaction information window, and we're going to go look at this in GP, but this is where we can make changes at the detail level for tax reporting. Let's jump back into GP for a minute. This is the last menu item option under the transactions menu for purchasing. So you have to drag your slider all the way to the bottom, get to edit 1099 transaction information, and I pull up that Beaumont vendor. And here are all the transactions. My system has got open 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So here's all the transactions from those years that it's currently tracking for 1099 reporting. And you can see I can come in here and make a change. I can say, well, this one's not a 1099 transaction. I need to change it. Well, I can easily make that change at the detail level. The good part about this is, unlike that 1099 detail card that we looked at earlier, if I make the change here, I'm changing the transaction in the table. So when I run a reconcile, it reconciles the totals it's going to report back to these transaction details. So this keeps my system consistent. So the details I'm tracking are what's going to report on my forms. And so if I looked at the 2023, all three of these transactions would report in box 7 on my 1099. So if I have to make some changes by vendor, I can go in vendor by vendor, look at all the transactions that are there, and see what's tracking and make corrections as I need to. If I run my 1099s and I say, wait a minute, that doesn't look right for this vendor, I can come into here and say, well, which transactions is it really tracking? Okay. So this is where you can make your changes to your transaction information. This is one of the few times where you can actually edit the data for a posted transaction after it's been completed. You know, typically if you enter a $10,000 transaction and it should have been $5,000, you've got to void that first transaction and enter it correctly. This is the one case where you can come in and say, no, let's change it. It was $2,067. I need to change it to $67. I can make a change in the amount. I can make a change in the reporting form. I can make a change in the box easily. Okay. So that's how you would change detailed transactions. This is a big screen for your end, making sure that your data is all properly formatted. All right, let's move on. So this is probably the other key window for changes. So the utility update 1099 information, and I don't know how to spell information evidently. This window gives you the ability to change a vendor or a group of vendors very quickly between line items. And this is probably going to be the screen we're going to use at year end to get all your reporting set up correctly. Let's look at that in GP again. So I'm going to be under utilities, purchasing, the purchasing pane, utilities, update 1099 information. And what I can do here is I can change the vendor. So this is going to change the vendor card. I can change the 1099 transactions. So it doesn't change the vendor card, but it just changes the transactions that we're tracking. Or we can change the vendor and the 1099 transactions. If I come here and I drop down tax type, you can see here's all the tracking that we're currently doing, right? So if I've got a vendor I forgot to mark as a 1099 vendor, I can say, you know what? He's currently not a 1099 vendor, but I want to track him as a box 7 miscellaneous. I put his vendor ID in here, insert that. Let's just put a vendor in there, and let's just say this guy right here, I hadn't tracked. I insert that. Now I'm going to update. If I hit process, I'll update all of his transactions that are in the open file from not a 1099 vendor to a miscellaneous box 7. All right. The important thing here is probably better if I've got somebody I'm tracking box 7 right now that I need to move to NEC box 1, then once that update's been applied, I should be able to pick the NEC in this box and box 1 here, and then I can make those changes either vendor by vendor, or I can remove that, and I can do all my vendors at one time. So I can move all my vendors that are currently set up as miscellaneous box 7 and make them to be an NEC box 1 once Microsoft has updated this form and made that available to me. So this is what you're going to do at the end of the year. You're going to update all those box 7s to the box 1 of the NEC and get all of your NEC reporting onto the new form. Likewise, you're going to come in here, you're going to move all your box 14 attorney proceeds to box 10, which will say attorney proceeds then at that point. And you're going to move any of your box, what is it, 9, right? I guess that's not even on here. It didn't even track 9s. So you can see we'll be able to make the changes in a hurry for all the things that need to change. We'll make them just a few steps to change my whole vendor file. That'll update the vendor. It'll update all the 1099 transactions it's reporting. Then you should be able to go in and print your 1099s and make sure everything's reporting correctly. So update 1099 and edit 1099 transaction information. Those are your two key windows for next year when you're getting your data aligned with the new forms. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about here is the, well, not the last thing. This is the print form. If you're using GP to print them, you're familiar with this form. This hasn't changed. The only difference might be that we're going to have a new type here. You'll have an NEC type that you can print to. But that's your GP print window. It's under the routines option. And then the last thing I want to look at, a lot of people probably don't even know this exists. If you have to do backup withholding for a vendor, GP makes that easy for you. You can set those vendors up to do backup withholding. You have to start by setting up your withholding vendor ID. Now this is on the company setup options. So we're in administration, setup, company setup, the company option, and then the option button under company. So you got company setup options, and then down here it says withholding vendor ID. Now this vendor ID, I just picked a vendor to get somebody in there, but this really would be the vendor you're going to make the payment to. So in this case, like in my case, I'm in Missouri, so I want to make a payment to the Missouri Department of Revenue, right? I'm not paying Beaumont Construction. I've got an invoice from Beaumont Construction for $10,000. I'm only going to pay them $8,000 because they're subject to 20% backup withholding, and so I'm going to pay the other $2,000 to the state of Missouri. So I would put the state of Missouri in my withholding vendor ID. So this is the vendor, this is the state agency that you're going to pay on this window setup. When you've got this turned on, this makes something available that, to be honest with you, I didn't know this. I didn't remember that this existed until just recently. But when you have that turned on there, there's a withholding button here at the bottom of the vendor card. And this is where you would set up the vendor for backup withholding. So you'd say, yep, they're subject to withholding, and you'd fill this all out and make sure you're tracking backup withholding for that vendor. But you don't even get that button if you don't have the card turned on under administration. So those are the tools GP has for 1099 reporting.